Hello, sixth graders. Continuing on here in Unit 2, our Order of Operations unit. Our lesson today is properties. So make sure you have the unit and the title written down. Our learning target, I can identify properties from mathematical expressions, and I can use properties to solve problems. Our first property that we have here is our distributive property. So make sure you have this copied down, distributive property, along with the words. This is when we multiply a sum by a number, or in order to multiply a sum by a number, we're going to multiply each addend of the sum by the number outside the parentheses. So what does that mean? Well, if we have this example, 3 parentheses 4 plus 6, what we do is we take the 3 and we distribute it or multiply it by each number inside the parentheses. So we do 3 times 4, and then we do 3 times 6. And then we can use that to solve it. Or we can go the opposite way. If we're taking 5 multiplied by 7, and then also 5 times 3, we can take that 5 out and write it in front of the parentheses, and then the number that they're being multiplied by, the 7 and 3, would go inside the parentheses. So then, and then they're just showing it again here with algebra, so using variables. So if we have these examples, which again should be written down in our notes, 6 parentheses 3 plus 4. What we're going to do is we are going to take the 6 and the number outside the parentheses, and we are going to distribute it to each number inside the parentheses. Now remember, right here is a multiplication. So now we're going to do 6 times 3 and 6 times 4. And in the middle we have addition, so we are adding those two together. So 6 times 3, we could then solve this, is 18. And 6 times 4 is 24. Add those together, and that will equal 42. So that's using the distributive property. This one, they already distributed it for us, but we could rewrite it the other way, going backwards. So since 2 is being multiplied by both of our numbers, that would go outside of our parenthesis. And then inside our parentheses is this part, the number that they're being multiplied by, the 2 and the 5. Okay. If we were to solve this here, 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 5 is 10, and that equals 14. So using the distributive property to solve that. Again, take the 9, distribute it to each number inside the parenthesis. 9 times 5, and 9 times 1. 45 plus 9, which is 54. So that's using the distributive property. More properties that we need to have written down, so make sure you have these copied in your notebook. The commutative property, this states that the order in which two numbers are added or multiplied, it only applies for those two operations, does not change their sum or product. So when you are adding numbers, you can change the order. So for example, 5 plus 3, we could also do 3 plus 5, and we would end up with the same answer. And that's the same thing with multiplication. We could do 2 times 4, or we could do 4 times 2, but either way, we're going to end up with the same answer. The associative property, the way in which 3 numbers are grouped, okay, that's the parentheses part of it, when they are added or multiplied, again, notice it's only addition and multiplication, does not change their sum or product. So if I had 5 plus parentheses 1 plus 3, okay, that's 1 plus 3 is 4, 4 plus 5 is 9. I also could do 5 and 1 grouped together first, so I could add those two, which would be 6 plus 3. Either way, we get an answer of 9. So you can change the numbers, how they're grouped, you get the same answer. And again, that also applies for multiplication. The identity property, the sum of an addend and 0 is the addend. So you can add 0 to any number and you will keep that same number. And then for multiplication, the product of a factor and 1 is the factor. So what that means is we can take 5 plus any number, and we're still going to end up with that same number. And then in multiplication, we can multiply any number by 1, and you're still going to have that number you started with. So we kind of touched on this on the last slide, but let's go ahead and think about some examples. So copy these examples down as you do them. So commutative property. Again, you can change the order, but it does not change your answer. So let's look at some examples. We could have 8 plus 2, Or we could do 2 plus 8, but either way we get the same answer. We could do 7 plus 4, which is 11, or we could do 4 plus 7, and either way we end up with the same answer. And then for multiplication, we could do 5 times 3, which is 15, or we could do 3 times 3 times 5, which would be 15. So again, changing the order, you get the same answer. Associative property, we can change how they're grouped, but either way we end up with the same answer. So if I did 8 plus 3 parentheses plus 2, maybe I look at that and I think, it would be easier if I add the 8 and 2 first and then add the 3 after, because 8 plus 2 is 10. So I can change it, but either way I get the same answer, right? If I did 8 plus 3 first, that would be 11 plus 2, which is 13. Or if I start with the 8 plus 2, that's 10, plus 3 is 13. So just kind of changing the grouping might make it a little easier to solve. With multiplication, let's say my problem was 9 times 4 times 10. Maybe I want to start with the 9 times 10 first, and then multiply by 4. Okay, you can change how the numbers are grouped, but you'll still end up with the same answer. Identity property of 1. So I can take any number and multiply it by 1, and I still end up with that same number. I could take 738 times 1, and it still is going to give me the same answer. It does not change the identity of that number. Identity of 0 is we can add 0 to any number. 543, add 0 to it, we still have that same number that we started with. All right, we are going to now try these problems where we are trying to name the property that is shown. So they have the examples. I want you to pause, write the example down, and the property that's being shown. The first one, 1 plus 2 plus 3, and now they're changing the order to 3 plus 1 plus 2. That is the commutative property of addition. That's where we can change the order of the numbers, but it does not change our answer. Next one, we had 4 parentheses 5 plus 7, and then we took the 4 and we distributed. So that's the distributive property. Take the number on the outside, multiply it by each number on the inside. 5 times 0 equals 0. This one wasn't listed, but this is actually called the 0 property, where we can multiply any number by 0 and it will always equal 0. 12 plus 3 equals 3 plus 12. So we're changing the order. That is the commutative property of addition. Change the order, still get the same answer. 16 equals 1 times 16, so we can multiply any number by 1 and we still end up with the same answer. That is the identity property. And the last one, 2 plus 1 plus 5, and then we're changing the grouping. That is the associative property of addition. Okay, remember you can do it for multiplication as well, but in this case it's addition that's being shown. Now you might be thinking, what is the point of all of these things? Why is this helping us? What are these properties important for? Well, let's say we have this problem right here, 4 times 12 times 25, and we have to solve that in our head. And you're like, okay. What we could do is we could start with the commutative property where we change the grouping. So I'm going to reorder it, and now I'm going to say, okay, actually I'm going to do the 4 times 25, which comes into our associative property. I'm going to do the 4 times 25 first because I can solve that in my head. And I know 4 times 25 is 100. Now, I would just have to do 100 times 12, which is a whole lot easier than starting with 4 times 12 and then trying to multiply by 25. So changing the order in the grouping made it so that I could solve that problem in my head instead of getting stuck with some icky multiplication. So on this one, we're going to try these and we're going to justify each step by naming the property that we used. So we had 40 times 7 times 5. So originally they want us to start with the 7 times 5, which I can do that in my head, which is 35, but then I'm like, 35 times 40, that's not as nice. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with regrouping my numbers, and I'm going to do the 40 times 5 first, because multiplying by 5 is a little bit easier, and then we would multiply by 7. And that's the associative property, okay, where you can change the grouping. So 40 times 5, I'm going to take the 0 off. 4 times 5 is 20. Add a 0 back on for the one I took off. And now we're going to take that times 7. And I can still do this in my head. I know that 2 times 7 is 14. And then I just have to include those 2 zeros. So there we go. I solved that in my head. Where if I had, again, done the 7 times 5 first, I would have then had to figure out 40 times 35. Not so easy. Next one, 89 plus 15 plus 9. If I'm trying to solve that in my head, looking at this problem, I'm instantly like, well, why don't I do 89 plus 1 first? Because then that's going to make a nice even number that I can then add the 15 to. And again, that's the associative property of addition, where I can change the groupings, but it doesn't change my answer. So 89 plus 1 is 90. 90 plus 15, well, 90 plus 10 would be 100, plus another 5, 105. Okay, so again, here are the summary of the properties. The commutative property of addition, we can change the order, but it doesn't matter. Same thing with multiplication. Associative property, we can change the grouping of the numbers, but still get the same answer. And then you have those identity properties or the zero property. That's all for our video on properties. If you are still stuck, go back, rewatch parts of the video. Otherwise, make sure you have your notes in your backpack so that they are ready for class tomorrow.